And we are now going live. It's setting up the meeting and we'll be ready in about 5 seconds and we're good. Wanda, that's you.
Great. Thank you, Jessica. Good evening, everyone. My name is Wanda Watts, and I am the Baltimore City Engagement Liaison for the Consent Decree Monitoring Team. And I'm having technical difficulties, so I may blink in and out, but we're going to do just the best that we can. Tonight, we have our moderators coming from the Baltimore City NAACP. And the topics that are going to be discussed tonight are stop searches and arrests, transportations of persons in custody, BPD assessments, and officer wellness. And I'm going to turn it over to Ken Thompson, who is the lead monitor for the consent decree, and he's going to take it from there, and I'll join you later.
Thank you, Wanda, and thank you, Mr. President, for inviting us into your living room. We're always happy to do our presentations, especially with the NAACP. What I would like to do tonight is, first of all, to go over with the audience the last 3 topics that we did this past quarter. This is the way we normally handle our forums, and as Wanda just indicated, the 3 or the 4 topics that we're going to talk about are going to be stop, search, and arrest, impartial policing. What were the other ones? Officer wellness, and of course, what was the 4th one?
Transportation.
Yeah, transportation persons in custody. Thank you. So we're going to do that. But before we do that, I try to give the folks at home what I call a 20,000 foot view of where I see and where we see the consent decree as we stand here and talk tonight. And we do this, and I do this through the lens of what I call the Global 5. And that would be training, that would be staffing, that would be technology, and that would be accountability. Now, let me go through those real quick. Let's talk about training. Training, of course, is extremely important. And if you don't have good training, you're not going to have good police officers. So what I will say to you is, when the monitoring team first came to work back in 2018, we recognized that this department was seriously dysfunctional. It needed a lot of work. It had to be built up from the ground up. And so with the assistance of the Department of Justice, the monitoring team helped the Baltimore City Police Department to develop or revise new policies. And from those new policies, we were able to help the department develop a really, really good curriculum so that they could train their officers. And I can say to you today that the training unit of the department is really one of the best in the country. It's done a really, really great job of developing curricula that's adult based oriented. It's based on scenarios as opposed to the old lecture-based way of training people. And I think from the surveys we've gotten from officers, most of them are quite happy with the training. The other good thing, of course, is that the department finally found itself a much better academy over the University of Baltimore. So they moved away from that old dilapidated building over on Park Heights Avenue. So just from appearances and from curriculum, I mean, we are seeing some good things. And one of the things that I look at when I try to figure out, are we seeing some results? Well, we can go back a couple of years ago to the George Floyd uprising. And if everyone remembers, if you looked around the country, most police departments were having one difficult time handling the protests. Well, Baltimore City and its department got one of the highest ratings in the country. So to me, that's always a good testament that the training has been doing its job, and it's only gotten better since then. Now, the other area I look at is accountability. And what do I mean by that? Well, that really envisions a couple of things. It takes into consideration supervision, but it also takes into consideration the disciplinary process. Now, why is that so important? Well, even if you have good policies, even if you have good training, even if you have good supervisors who are doing their jobs, assisting their subordinates, giving them the counseling when they need it, and taking other steps in discipline if they need it. But, even with those in place, when you're dealing with human beings, somebody's going to cross the line. And so one of the things that Baltimore Police Department has always been suspect with is their discipline of their police officers. Well, we now have an accountability system in Baltimore. The misconduct and discipline part of the department is so much better. This is not the same department that it was in 2017. It's got a ways to go. It's not it's not perfect. They still have too many cases assigned to investigators, but we, the monitoring team, we've been looking at this unit for quite some time. First time we looked at it was in 2018. We did an informal review, and I can tell you that the way those cases were handled, it was deplorable. We've done some other informal reviews since that time, and I can tell you that the ones we've done in the last 6 months have shown a remarkable improvement. Again, they're not there yet where we can say that they are in compliance, but they're getting there. It's a much better department. They've reduced the number of cases that they have to deal with. And one of the most important things that I look at is this department, for the first time in its history, has actually trained in a professional way its detectives, its investigators who investigate police misconduct. So, that's a big step forward. The other leg that I look at is technology. Well, again, in 1980, when we first came on board in 2017, and I'm told that the platform that this department was working from was basically a 1985 platform. They now have an RMS system that is clearly state-of-the-art. It allows the police officers to do field-based reporting, which means that they don't have to wait until their shift is over when they will have forgotten important things. They can now do their reports almost in real time, and there's no excuse for them missing important things that need to go in those reports. But the other reason why the technology has become so important, in order for the monitoring team to do its job, we have to have data. And of course, we're not going to get data if everything is dependent on handwritten notes and handwritten forms. But we now are in a situation where everything is once it's on a computer, it's being filed, it's being stored. It's not perfect yet, but it's getting there. But we will shortly have, and Dr. Bowman will talk about this, I'm certain at some length, we'll be in a position to do the appropriate kind of analysis as we do our assessments. The fourth leg, staffing. Well, this is the one area that I am afraid is I can't really give you a glowing report. It may not all be the department's fault, because staffing police departments around the country has proven to be a huge challenge. But what I do know is that the department's got to figure out a way to fix their staffing, because staffing affects everything they do, from the crime fighting strategy down to the things that they need to do to come out from under the consent decree. One of the big things that the consent decree requires is that police officers, especially in patrol, that they spend 40% of their time engaging with the public and 60% of their time answering calls for service. Well, when you have a department that's 400 bodies short, and I think 300 in patrol, they're going to have a really, really tough time complying with that part of the consent decree. So, until they do something with staffing, they're trying. They're now the highest paid in the state, as they should be, because they have the toughest job. They have all kinds of educational incentives. They have incentives for folks who want to live in the city. But, they're going to have to figure out a way to do more, because they're going to have enough staffing to do what the consent decree requires in order to come out from under federal supervision. So this takes me to the fifth leg, which is assessments. And this is where I'm going to meander into the territory where my subject matter experts are going to talk about. About 2 years ago, the judge overseeing this case, Judge Bedard, essentially told the monitoring team, look, everybody spent a lot of time and some money, and a lot of technical skills have been transferred over to different people trying to get this department up to speed. So it's now time, this was a conversation we had about 2 years ago, it's now time to figure out whether or not all of the time and money that's been spent trying to upgrade this department is bearing some fruit. Well, we've been doing those assessments now for close to 2 years. We've had some good results. We've had some not so good results. But tonight, in the four areas that I'm talking about, two in particular, I think we have some really, really good news, because two of those subject matter areas are really close to being in what we call initial compliance, and that would be officer wellness, and that would be transportation of persons in custody. The other two things are moving along quite well, but they're a little further behind. But without any further ado, I want my subject matter experts to really spend some time talking so you can hear what we've talked about this past quarter. And so, Mr. President, with your permission, I would like to call Dr. Bowman to discuss stop, search, and arrest. And I would ask that he be followed by Dr. Mears to talk about impartial policing, followed by Taz Villasenor, who'll talk a little bit about transportation. And Jessica, you can follow up with officer wellness, okay?
Thank
So
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. I'll move forward. I can almost say that concludes my remarks after your very thorough coverage of the four corners of the work that we're doing. But I am the monitor primarily responsible for monitoring the area of stop, searches, and arrest. And just in layman's terms, stops occur when a police officer or the police department see a person that's violating a traffic law and decide that they want to stop them, or they see a person that meets the description of a suspicious person or a suspicious vehicle, and they want to stop them to investigate if a crime is occurring or may have occurred. Sometimes the police department may want to conduct a stop just to say hello. And that's a different category of stops. So we look at each of those different kinds of stops, whether they're voluntary or involuntary from the community perspective. We're taking a look at the constitutionality of those stops. Now, the BPD has the responsibility to conduct the legally correct processes in making those stops. And so we can get pretty technical. I won't at this point. I'll just say that when we take a look at how BPD makes its stops of people, we're looking at the constitutionality of their efforts, but we're also looking at how their actions on those stops actually comply with the policies. And so this whole process of monitoring the consent decree and looking at BPD from the stop, searches, and arrest perspective has involved looking at stops, but not just the stops, looking at all kinds of searches, search warrants, seeing how the department actually secure and interview witnesses, how they conduct interrogations or questioning the people who they've stopped already, what their procedures are when they make arrests for driving under the influence, and how they generally handle persons in custody. We look to see if the process they're engaging is a criminal citation process or a civil citation process. There's a legal difference that our law professor can quite adequately describe if necessary. But we look at civil versus criminal citations. We look at the decisions to make, arrest, or cite based on the possession of marijuana or some type of marijuana offense. We look at misdemeanor theft procedures and video surveillance procedures, as well as a category that we call lesser offenses and alternatives to arrest. In fact, in our field, we really call these quality of life types of arrest, the lesser offenses. And we look to see if BPD is actually exercising the optimal alternative to arrest. Quite often when they're confronting somebody that's involved in a lesser offense, the consent decree, and we believe, the consent decree says, and we believe that there are better alternatives that exist in most cases than just plainly making arrest. And so in order to assure that BPD's actions are constitutional or legal, we have looked at, as Mr. Thompson indicated, the policies. And we worked with BPD and the Department of Justice to revise those policies. And they have now revised 3 different sets of policies that apply to all of these stops, searches, and arrests. In order to make sure that what they do on the street is appropriate, and when the officers react in a way that isn't appropriate, there has to be applicable policies so that if they're acting outside of policy, then the department can take corrective action, which may include disciplinary action, may include training, but the boundaries of the police officer's actions have to be expressed by the policies. And so they've gone through the process of revising all of the policies that apply to the stop, searches, and arrests. They, once the policies are completed and approved, then they go, like Mr. Thompson indicated, through a training process. And now the officers have been trained on the SSA, or the stop, searches, and arrest policies. After that, we have to go out and take a look to see if the actions on the street are consistent with what the policies require and what the training has taught. And so that gets us to the point we're at right now, evaluating the conduct on the street. In order to do that properly, we have to either see what the officers are doing face to face in person. We have to be able to review body-worn camera or other types of video, or as Mr. Thompson indicated, we have to be able to review the data to see what the records and the data tells us about the officer's actions, and to see if the data is consistent with the training. The data says that the officer's actions is consistent with what the policy requires. The data then not only comes in the form of videos, but also reports and records. And in order to review those records in real time, they must be readily accessible. Now, a city the size of Baltimore, one of the larger cities in the country, with the number of officers Baltimore have, they create millions of records every year. And when we first went in looking at stop, searches, and arrests, we found that those records were almost entirely manual, were almost entirely paper and pencil, and they were not well organized. And so when I first went in to look at their stop, search, and arrest records, they were in boxes, floor to ceiling, stacked up in a room and unorganized. And there's really no way to accurately assess the behavior with records stored like that. As Mr. Thompson indicated, they didn't have an electronic records management system at that point, but they've now gone through the procurement process. They've implemented the RMS. They have worked on it to make sure that the officers are able to capture the right information, that the system actually captures that information and stores it, and that those who are looking to assess the data can access the right data, the right fields through the system, that the data that comes up reflects what actually happens on the street, and that we're able to really assess that data. BPD is just now this month, January 2023, moving to the point with the new records management system where we believe we can start conducting reliable data analyses from the data in the system. It's been a long process. It's required a lot of troubleshooting, but we believe now in January 2023, we're there. So we're spending the next 3 months or so working with the department, testing the data to make sure that what they provide to us is accurate and reliable. And when that data is assessed, that it paints the right picture of what's really happening out there on the street, so that we'll know if what's happening is consistent with policy or training, then that's a thumbs up. But to the extent that it's not, we'll rate it, we'll call that to their attention, we will make sure that corrective action is taken, and we will at least quarterly report back out to the community and the courts on what we find. Ultimately, we want the BPD to have a system where they can themselves measure and monitor the work that they're doing with stop, searches, and arrests, where they can measure on an ongoing basis, monitor and report out to the public the efficacy of the policies and the training on those stops, and report out the constitutionality and to the extent that they're following and abiding by their policy when they're conducting all of this stops activity. So part of what we're doing is not just watching and monitoring, but we also want to make sure that BPD develops a sustainable process where when the monitoring team leaves from the city of Baltimore, that the community and the residents will have confidence that if you're stopped by a BPD officer, that they're going to follow the constitutionally correct actions in executing that stop from the initial stop all the way to the end, whether it involves an arrest or whether it involves a citation or if it's just to say hello to you. So that in a nutshell is what we've done with stop, searches, and arrests. We will continue to monitor that area and report out to you as we render our findings in this particular area. So Ken, that's all I'm going to say. I'll throw it on to the next person at this point.
Thank you, T. Tracy?
Thanks. Thank you, Dr. Bowman. So Dr. Bowman described a pretty extensive process of evaluations for stops, searches, and arrest. And I'm going to go a little bit deeper into my area, which is fair and impartial policing, which really goes hand in hand with the materials on stop, search, and arrest. And before I explain a little bit about my area, I want to make a couple of points and highlight what Dr. Bowman said. First, you might have noted that he discussed the constitutionality of a stop and arrest. Usually people think about that under the Fourth Amendment. Of course, in a critical aspect of the consent decree was compliance with the 14th Amendment, equal protection, which focuses on discrimination. And that's an area that falls along the lines of fair and impartial policing. And another thing he noted, though, is that we spent a long time developing policies that are not only designed to ensure that the Baltimore Police Department was engaging in constitutional policing, but also good policing, effective policing, fair policing. And the reason for pointing out the distinction between those two is that constitutionality is just the minimum floor of what citizens deserve in their interactions with police. We are actually trying to help, and the Baltimore Police Department desires, I believe, to achieve policing that definitely exceeds that baseline. And to that end, it's worth thinking about what our goal is with respect to impartial policing. The consent decree asserts, and I'm quoting now, policing fairly and without bias is central to promoting broad community engagement and building partnerships between law enforcement and community members that are an important part of effective policing. And so to that end, we developed a series of policies, the bedrock policy of impartial policing, which is policy 317, but a number of other ones that are designed to promote a perception of fairness and engagement among community members. One example of a policy like that is policy 325, which is procedural justice in interactions. Let me make sure I get the title of this. It's actually just called procedural justice in interactions, which is a way of carrying out, for example, a stop or an arrest, but could be other kinds of interactions. It's useful to focus on that particular policy because one of the things that the department has started to do is to actually assess its own compliance with this policy. So in addition to the work that Dr. Bowman explained in detail that we do, which is to do those kinds of evaluations and assessments ourselves by looking at body-worn camera footage and also reading the documentations that the officers themselves produce. The department itself has built up a practice of evaluating whether they are in compliance with their own policy. And one of the things that they've done is come up with a randomized procedure where they select particular incidents from every district and actually have personnel within the department look at those incidents, and they have two people look at each incident to assess the extent to which the interaction is consistent with the policy that the department itself has articulated. To our mind, one of the things that's incredibly interesting and actually heartening to see is over time, and they've been conducting these analyses for just over a year now. At the beginning, there wasn't always as much compliance with the department's own policy. That is, they were able to figure out and detect weaknesses in compliance. And yet also over time, their reports show that they themselves are getting increasingly better at ensuring that there's compliance with these policies that are critical to the ways in which community members perceive the fairness of the officers that they deal with. The BPD has also, in addition to developing this kind of assessment, has built in a feedback mechanism whereby supervisors are alerted to the individuals who are not in compliance, and then those individuals are also given extra support and training. So I think it's useful to focus just on this one aspect as an example, not only of our own work of assessment, but the incredibly important point that Dr. Bowman mentioned, which is the department itself is building its own capacity for review and assessment, which means that in the long term, there is every reason to think that once there is successful achievement of the goals that the consent decree sets out for the department, that they will be able to sustain that achievement.
Thank you, Tracy. Taz?
Good evening. My name is Roberto Villaseñor, but as you've heard, everyone calls me Taz. It's just easier to remember. I am covering there. I'm the lead on a couple areas of consent decree use of force and transported prisoners and youth. Transported prisoners is one area that we felt that we could see a lot of substantial movement, and we really did early on. But what we've learned with this, it's the fine details that you have to go over before you could say that an agency is fully in compliance. You know, we hit it right from the get-go with the important things, making sure that the vehicles used for transport of prisoners had the proper safety equipment, a seat belt for every person who was put in the vehicle, for the wagons, a safety strap for individuals to hold on to in addition to the seat belt. For the sedans, also seat belt equipped and partitions. And also video cameras in the wagon so that we could monitor the safety of the individuals there. And then also it will record every transaction during a transport. So if there's anything that goes wrong or is done improperly, we have video record of it. Policy was revised before the consent decree was even put in place. BPD saw what was coming down the pipe, and let's remember, one of the main reasons that we are here is because of the Freddie Gray incident, which was a transport issue. And so they had already remedied and revised their policies and put that into place. There's weekly inspections. When I first started in 2017 and 18, I was flying out to Baltimore and taking part in the inspections of the vehicles, getting inside every vehicle that they use for transport to make sure the seat belts were there, that they were functioning, that the strap belts were not swayed or rubbed raw or anything, or not able to be held, and that the cameras were all working. In addition to that, the consent decree, and this is really unique in that the only area the consent decree spells out the criteria to audit the elements of the transport. And they gave very explicit instructions with a certain number of cases from each patrol district that need to have random audits performed of the entire transport interaction. And there's a whole list of questions. There's 29 requirements over 12 paragraphs that are listed that the BPD has to come into compliance with. And these audits were set up so they had to do 45 audits in a quarter to make sure they were doing all of these components and they're tracking them and scoring them. To BPD's credit, they ended up saying we're going to do more than that. They're now doing 60 audits a quarter because they included the warrant task force as a patrol division, which was a smart thing because they transport a lot of people after warrant arrests. And so it's good to make sure that that area of the department is abiding by the rules. So they're doing more than they have to there. They also do random spot checks in the field to make sure that all the criteria is being followed, all the equipment is properly set up, and that the policies are being adhered to. A couple of things that have caused us to not reach full compliance as of yet were basically, in my mind, a change in how BPD is doing work, which is a good thing. When the CD, the consent decree, was first written, this was at a time when BPD there's a technique called, jump in a corner, where they'd sweep in from several different directions and vehicles, where a group of people were hanging out on a street corner, and they would end up arresting several people all at once from that area. That no longer is allowed. That's not how they're told to operate. And so it's very rare now that you get a transport that has more than one person during the transport. Whereas when the consent decree was first written, it'd be quite common to have 3, 4, 5 people in a single transport vehicle. So that brought up issues of separating adults from juveniles, male from female, gender non-conforming from gender conforming, and issues that needed to be taken care of. Well, that's not happening too often now because they're single transport. So it's hard to get data on those things. So we're working with BPD to try and identify those relatively few cases that occur in the grand scheme of how many transports they do, and doing those audits purposely as opposed to randomly, so that we can sit there and say, yes, when they come across this, it is done in compliance. Now, I've been doing these audits for close to 2 years. And for the first time this last month, last week when I was there, remember how they find these cases to audit. They look at the hundreds of transports per month and they randomly select out 20 out of maybe 500 or 600 transports. And then I go and I select 2 random transports out of their 20 random transports. It just so happened we lucked out and I got a case where they had a separation of 2 individuals and they did it perfectly. So I do know the policies there, they've listened to it. We just now need to be able to look at enough of the cases to confidently say that 95% or better of the time that they're there and they engage in this, they do it right. Another issue is going to be transport of medical equipment, such as someone gets arrested and has crutches. We need to make sure that BPD transports the crutches to whatever their destination is going to be and properly get that back to them. So a few things like that on paper it needed to be done, it needed to be brought into the consent decree, but it's a little bit harder to prove compliance, but we're not letting that daunt us. We're moving forward, we're setting up policies to capture that. But our hope, and the judge has made this very clear, he wants us to see where they are in regard to that, if they're in compliance or not, hopefully sooner than later. So that's where I'm working on that right now. And it is an area where BPD has showed tremendous progress and they have a lot of willingness to work at the outstanding issues. For those issues that are not difficult to catch, such as properly searching all people who are transported or attending to their medical needs, they occasionally still mess up on that. And what I'm pleased to say is I also watch their ComStat meetings every week. They put up a scorecard that we developed to check every single one of these categories. And if they have an incident that was not in compliance, they either offer additional training if the individual hasn't had the training, or more likely now is what's happening is they're referring to PIB for possible misconduct investigations. And we are getting sustained resolutions to some of those, as well as non-sustained. And I've asked to look at the non-sustained ones to make sure that those are valid as well. So there's a lot of work being done there, and I hope that still is going to be one of the first areas that we could say BPD is fully compliant in that area. I guess, Jessica, you're next.
Thanks, Taz. I appreciate it. I'll try to be brief because I know our next section is about having the opportunity to hear from questions from our guests as well as those online. But I'm here to discuss with you briefly about officer safety and wellness programs at BPD. We have, if you are not familiar with officer safety and wellness, it is where a police agency invests in its people by offering physical and mental health and wellness programs on a variety of capacities in order to serve both the officers and staff of BPD as well as their family with resources that are needed to keep them healthy and whole, looking at the job as a holistic approach to care for their employees, knowing that the job of being an officer in Baltimore is a high stress job that has a lot of impact on one's personal life and personal health. Officer safety and wellness programs attempt to mitigate that with access to quality mental health care, regular physicals, access to training and workout rooms, as well as trainings that serve officers in better understanding how to manage their stress, personal finances, and home life. This year, we entered into an assessment phase on officer safety and wellness programs to look at what had been developed at BPD, which has been rather robust and has had a large and diverse approach to addressing the unique needs that law enforcement officers face on a daily basis. BPD has developed a number of programs that they hope will better serve their officers, including just a few to mention access to a full range of mental health services through employee assistance programs, including access to mental health practitioners that specifically target and understand the stress and job of a law enforcement officer. This is really important, we found across the nation, for officers who are seeking this type of support, because they're able to approach the therapist and or psychologist who already understand the unique nature of their employment and can address directly some of the stresses that are specific to their field of employment. In addition, BPD has also began the implementation of an early intervention system. This system allows BPD to track both time, like sick days that officers might take, complaints coming in either internal or external against an officer that might be having an outside issue that's impacting their everyday ability to do their job, as well as several other indicators, all that produce reports to alert the BPD leadership, but more specifically the Officer Safety and Wellness Unit, that there could be an officer who is in a personal crisis or facing a crisis, and that is bleeding into their ability to do their work at their top performance. And so this early warning system allows the Officer Safety and Wellness Department of BPD to reach out to an officer who might be in crisis and offer some direct supports based on a variety of different topics where they might need an intervention. In addition to this, then I should pause to say this is quite unique. This is a new system of approaching officer safety and wellness that we've seen across the country. And BPD is specifically using it in a way to target the health and wellness of their officers with intentional care, something that is deeply important. As Dr. Mears actually said at the on the task force of 21st century policing, hurt people, and we need to acknowledge that when our officers are hurting, their jobs become more complex. Their ability to manage the stress of the moment, to call upon the tools they have and the training that they've used and best approach it, can be clouded by the challenges that they're facing in other areas of their life, from addiction to divorce to financial troubles. So where BPD is now intervening early and often with their officers to address these needs, puts them in an advanced state of caring for their people and hoping too that helps the community of Baltimore in their interactions with law enforcement officials. Over this last year, as we entered into the assessment, we did a survey of officers to better understand whether they knew that these services were there for them. We were pleased to find in our research that 80 to 90% of the officers did in fact know that there were wellness programs available to them that they could reach out to. Their depth of understanding, though, could be improved upon. And BPD themselves has done a study with Hopkins to better understand that. And they now know that they can further explain their wellness service programs to their staff through a variety of different mechanisms that they've just begun engaging with. This includes, but it is not limited to, now officers have an app on their phone that they can tap into to see all of the officer safety and wellness programs available through them. And they can reach out through this app to schedule appointments, to learn how to do some quick stress reduction tactics, as well as the trainings that are available to them in this space. Also, through BPD's own research, they learned more about some of the things that are very stressful to officers currently in the field. Identified from officers were things like trauma, work stress, and depression. These also related to lack of sleep, which also then amplifies all the things I just listed. So BPD has begun to hire a consultant to come in to offer sleep training and trauma reduction therapies across the whole department in order for people to better understand how they might daily, at the end of their day, process the stress of their job, work through some of the traumas through some, what we know as some early reaction therapies, things like deep breathing, meditation, focus, and talking to peers, and engage in ways that can reduce the stress and trauma of the day in order to help them better sleep, which then will create overall wellness for the officers. That will be rolling out this spring, and we're excited to see how that works inside the department. What we know is that officers since 2020 have had more access to services, better understand how to access these services, and every day more services become available to them. And BPD is working hard to launch those programs daily. Our findings did learn, though, that at the district level, BPD can improve how they educate their officers on a daily basis at their roll calls. And so things like posters, informative scripts that leadership will read, and more pushing through the apps and the Power DMS where officers get their training will be done on a regular basis to keep the officer safety and wellness programs at the forefront of all officers' thoughts as they move through their daily work. We'll be reassessing this space this summer into early fall, and we believe that as we've learned today, that BPD is in early compliance and on track to be completing a number of the paragraphs, at least possibly 4 out of the 7 in the officer safety and wellness space. We're excited to see how this program continues to work this year and are encouraged by what we've learned so far. I think I was the last one, Ken, so I think it's back to you now.
And I'm going to turn it over to the president. And if you have questions, either you have them or anyone in the audience, we'd be happy to take them for the remainder of the time we are on TV. You still there, Mr. President?
I believe we just need to have you unmute, Mr. Harris. And I do believe Wanda was speaking to you too, and she was going to speak now real quick. Wanda? I think she's having some technical difficulties. I see her screen is having some troubles. So Mr. Harris, we'll go ahead and let you go. And feel free to ask any questions. And just so you know, you're still on mute. And I'll add Reverend Kobe Little as well to the screen. And we're also joined by Ms. Kess and Ms. Chang.
If Wanda's able to speak now, Wanda, you can go ahead. Uh-oh, we can't hear you.
She's been having major technical difficulties, so we'll move her off screen and trust and that you can dive in.
Reverend Little?
He also is just rejoining us after being kicked out accidentally, I think, from Zoom. It's not our best day on Zoom today.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Can you hear me now?
We can.
We can.
Okay. Let me first start by saying thank you, Attorney Thompson, to you and the members of the BPD monitoring team. My apologies, for some reason, my computer has frozen up as I attempted to turn on my audio and camera. We want to thank you all for the invitation to participate in this forum for 2023. We have been looking forward to this conversation since we met last year. I want to just introduce the members of our team who are present here this evening, and they have some questions that are prepared. Then I'll come back with some questions based on what we've heard so far. First, we have with us, and you probably will remember, our Vice President, our Executive Vice President, Joshua Harris. We're also joined by Attorney Nashana Kess, who is Chair of our Legal Redress Committee and also our second Vice President. And then last but certainly not least, we're joined by Ms. Nicole Chang, who is the Chair of our Public Safety Committee. So with that, I'll turn it over to Vice President Harris, and we'll go through the questions that we've prepared, and then I'll come back with some questions based on the conversation we've already had.
Yeah, thank you so much, Reverend Little, and thank you so much, Chair Thompson, for having us, and to your subject matter experts. We at the NAACP appreciate the opportunity. We have gone through and we have solicited questions from our members over the last week or so, and we've kind of whittled them down. We'll be looking on social media to monitor, as I'm sure Ms. Watts will be as well, to see if there's any additional questions. And we'll kind of go through these. We'll rotate in asking our questions. Each of us has 3 between myself, Nashana, and Nicole that we've received from residents of Baltimore. And I just want to make sure that everyone can see me. I am still looking at Reverend Little, and I want to make sure that I'm able to be heard.
We can see you. We can hear you.
Okay, I just wanted to double check. Okay, great. First of all, I'd like to start by saying it's really great to hear those things that have been implemented around the officer wellness component. I just last week did a visit to the White House and met with the Vice President about the importance of mental health, and particularly changing the stigma around that access to care. So it's critical for us to really continue to have those conversations and provide those resources. But then I also like to say that it's also great to see that some of these policies have started to be implemented and being changed, or have been some of the policies are being changed. And what I like to say in addition to that is that we at the NAACP and African Americans around the country celebrate Juneteenth because there was a policy that was changed, but there was never implemented, right? Meaning that slaves were set free, but the implementation was separate. And so framing the conversation with policy and implementation are 2 separate things. And so we want to keep that in mind through the questions that we ask and that we pose here. And so the first question, I guess, that we'd like to ask that we got from one of our members is, do you all know how many police officers of BPD have been convicted of crimes since 2015?
I wouldn't know that. It's not something we follow.
Okay. We believe that is around 29 officers of BPD, according to the state's attorneys, what's been charges have been pressed against and convictions from the state's attorney's office. Do you know how many, what has been the plan for, I know that there was a question around engaging civilians in the hiring process and hiring engagement process to ensure that more positions in BPD could be filled by civilians. Can you talk to us a little bit about what that looks like and how civilians have been allowed to participate more meaningfully within the department?
Hey, Seth, you want to take a crack at that?
Sure, I'll start off with that, and thank you, Executive Director Harris. So every year for the last 3 years, the department has put out a staffing plan, and that staffing plan calls for increasing civilianization of certain functions within BPD, including administrative functions. And more and more civilians are being hired, but BPD is still falling quite short of civilianization goals. They actually have more room in the budget to hire civilians, and they've just not been able to fill the slots that have been made available. There has been, I think, as everybody knows, quite a lot of attrition in the sworn officers over the course of the past several years. That's a nationwide trend that for at least 1 year, 2020, BPD was able to avoid. It actually was able to hire more sworn officers than it lost. But in the last 2 years, in 21 and 22, it lost well over 100 more officers than it was able to hire. Some of that slack is supposed to be taken up under the staffing plan with more civilians. But BPD is a little bit slow on the uptake with respect to filling those positions, as I said. I mentioned administrative positions. One of the areas that we're really focused on is the training academy. That was a real focus early on because the training academy didn't have enough sworn officers or enough civilians. In the last several years, BPD has staffed the training academy with a sufficient number of sworn officers, and it has increased the number of civilians. But one of the things that is holding BPD back from achieving full and effective compliance in the area of officer training is that it still does not have a sufficient number of civilians under its staffing plan in the training academy. So long story short, yes, BPD is supposed to be increasing the number of civilians on staff pretty dramatically, and they're being given the budget to do it. But they're being, but the process has been slow.
Okay. Thank you so much for that. And I believe Attorney Kess will have some follow-up to that and what the hiring looks like. But before we go there, one of the other things that we know there were supposed to be changes and some training around involved specifically the process for how officers take reports of sexual assault and rape complaints. And I'm wondering if you can talk to us a little bit about what that training has been and what that looks like, or maybe it's something that's still in the works, just to ensure that women or men who have been sexually assaulted feel safe in sharing, filing their complaints with officers.
Tracy, I don't know, have you been, I mean, I know that's Nola's area.
Yeah, I was going to say, all I know is that that's NOLA's area, and I can say that there, I'm pretty sure that there was training, that there was a revision of the process, that the officers have been trained, and that they're implementing it, but I don't know the details.
I know a few of the details on that one. So to answer that question, there has been department-wide training on responses to sexual assaults consistent with the new policy, which is informed pretty heavily by the sexual assault response team and by community members. So that has taken place department-wide. And then importantly, sex offense unit detectives and other detectives in other specialized units like the child abuse unit that investigate allegations of sexual assault have received specialized training on responding to reports of sexual assault and on conducting sex assault investigations. And that multi-day training was offered initially in 2021, and there was a second training offered in 2022. There's going to be another training this year in 2023. And if memory serves, all of those trainings have, each of those trainings, I should say, has been a 2-day intensive in-service training for those detectives who investigate sex assault.
Thank you so much for that. And I will pass it on to Attorney Kess. And for her first question, I'd also like to add a little bit of context to it, is that we've received emails and messages from folks who've been applying to work at BPD to try to get an understanding of what that process and requirements look like. Folks who've been denied by BPD have now moved on in the final stages of the hiring process in other jurisdictions. And so a better understanding of that, just want to add that context to Attorney Kess's first question.
Thank you, Vice President Harris. And to Chairman Thompson's point, he talked about staffing and how the police department is understaffed, clearly and significantly understaffed. So what changes, if you know of any, have been made to the department's human resources and hiring practices to reduce or remove the barriers of entry for employment? And if there's an appeal process, if an individual is denied entry?
Let me start, and I have to put it in the right perspective because I know for certain that there were some barriers like the marijuana barrier that have been certainly relaxed, but we have to keep in mind that we want high-end people who have the right, not only attitude, but the right mental aptitude to be able to deal with the public in a fair and impartial way. And so I don't think we're looking to relax the rules that are important. I think what we're looking to do, quite frankly, there's a strong desire to encourage people who live in the city to work in the department. It's not because anybody's looking to discriminate. It's just that it makes sense to, at least makes sense to me, that if you're going to have a police force, it would be very helpful to have people who know the geography that they're working in. And so there is a strong emphasis on trying to retain or to recruit and hire people who live in the city. That's not to say they're not looking to hire people all over the country, because the department is so, they're in such need for folks. They're looking wherever they can find them. But I would say that I think the requirements that are set by this department, while they are very stringent, and I think they should be, because I think Baltimore deserves it. We don't want police officers who came in 10 or 15 years ago, who all you had to do was to have a brawny back and a mean spirit, with the idea you could somehow break people into performing. We want high-end, smart folks who understand empathy and who know how to work with people. So I think that's the paradigm that we're working from. Someone else on the team may have a sharper answer to your question, but that's how I look at the hiring process.
Thank you. And I just wanted to clarify if anyone had another input on this question, but not in terms of relaxing the process. And we're not asking about that, but just as you stated, there were barriers of marijuana that may have been a little bit relaxed now. So that's good. But if someone is denied entry, but then is entered into another jurisdiction, is there a way that they can appeal that process once they are denied?
Taz, I don't know, or Seth, you might. I don't know the answer to that, to be honest with you. I'm not sure that there is, but go ahead. I'm sorry.
It's really going to be case by case. There could be a variety of reasons why an individual may be denied. So I can't give a blanket answer that say, yes, they can appeal. I mean, the best thing I would do is just, if that individual, have them contact BPD or Baltimore City HR and ask, in their particular case, is there anything to be looked at? But there are often, either state mandated reasons or background mandated reasons why an individual is denied. And it's hard to give any type of blanket statement on that. I do know that BPD is trying to smooth the way for all hiring, because just like every agency in the country, they're having tremendous problems hiring police officers in today's environment. And it is a difficult occupation that they're trying to get people to sign up for. They've provided incentives to make BPD the most attractive one in the area, but it's still having problems in getting enough qualified candidates through. So if there's something going on that they need to be brought to their attention of something not being done right, absolutely, I would encourage them to reach out to City HR.
And is there, just for clarification, would there be something unique that Baltimore City has to where an individual would be denied employment by Baltimore City Police Department, but then accepted by another jurisdiction?
Not that I'm aware of.
Yeah, no, I can't think of any either, but other jurisdictions may have different criteria. I mean, I just don't know. We focus on Baltimore City and making sure that the criteria is fair, but that it's strict enough so that you get good police officers when they come in the door. I mean, I think that's the approach that we try to look at BPD.
We're grateful for the presentations that you all have made, but it has eaten up the bulk of the time that we're allotted. So I'm hopeful that we can extend and take a little bit more time to continue this conversation, because I know we have more questions on our end. On this particular issue, for me, one of the relevant questions is, what investments are being made to develop a pipeline so that we can hire internally? Listen, right now there are prison beds that are allotted based on test scores in Baltimore City. Those same kids who are destined to fall into this negative cycle, unless we are proactive, those same kids could become police officers from Baltimore who live in Baltimore if there are the appropriate investments made in the pipeline. And for us, this is, part of the work that has to be done to come into compliance with the consent decree. So we certainly hope that you all will press the department on this issue and not just, accept, well, yeah, departments everywhere are having challenges hiring.
Jessica, I don't want to put you in the hot seat, but I do recall a couple of years ago with the Explorers program and some other programs that I know BPD is involved in, trying to reach out to kids, as you say, Reverend, when they are kids, 12, 13, 14 years old, to try to get them interested in being police officers. Those programs exist. I remember 2 or 3 years ago, actually, and I can't tell you the name of the group, but it was a youth-based group. And, we would go around to these youth, and it's really more the police department's job, but the monitoring, and we always try to at least engage in this. I know there are strong efforts made to reach, what I say, kids when they're young, so that you can try to get them to be interested in joining the force. So I don't know, Jessica, if you have any more to add to that, because I remember you having some interest in that several years ago.
Recruitment and retention across sworn and non-sworn positions in BPD is a priority area both for the judge, the monitoring team, and BPD. In order to do the work they aim to do, there is no doubt that it requires the full capacity of their staffing to be up to date. So a couple things to say here that I've been listening to. One, to answer Ken's question directly, absolutely, there was previously a robust Explorers program in BPD that allowed youth in several schools in the Southern District as well as in the Central District to engage in early training around law enforcement, and then have the supports and built into the program that would allow them to be ready for recruitment at the age in which it was appropriate and the time for which they were ready. That program did falter during COVID, as one can imagine, and is being re-lifted up this year in order, again, to allow young adults in Baltimore City direct exposure to law enforcement as a profession with early training, much like you would see a cadet program in other areas, or ROTC at a high school. It has a similar function. But also there is BPD HR, and then there is city HR. They work off of one another. BPD's HR is increasingly improving their skills, talents, and standards, and has been up to par for some time with their timelines for completing the task and finding adequate candidates. That being said, it then must enter into a city HR process, which neither the monitoring team or BPD can control. Thereby, it does affect the process for which individuals are hired, especially on the civilian side. And I am under the understanding that that can be at times months long, and continues to need improvement and work. I encourage anyone concerned about that space to certainly reach out to elected officials that represent them to talk more further about how the city can be supported in its HR practices.
Thank you so much. And not to belabor this conversation, it's a super important conversation, but I did want to move on to the next topic, which was centered around mental health. We did talk a little bit about officer safety and wellness within the officer community and especially their families, which is a great thing to have. But I wanted to talk a little bit about the consent decree and mental health challenges in the community, and how BPD has adjusted some of the processes when dealing with individuals that may have those challenges. But I also wanted to couple that a little bit with transportation and how the mental health challenge or an individual who is hard to deal with, how the safety can be compromised, or how you all deal with safety in regards to those individuals as well.
Seth, can I ask you to start with that? Still there?
Yeah, sorry, I was just having a hard time unmuting. Yeah, so thanks for your question, Attorney Kess. There is a lot that the consent decree requires and that BPD has done, and there's also, and the BPD and the city, because this is actually a joint responsibility of BPD and the city under the consent decree. There's still a lot to be done. But, in addition to in addition to writing new policies and training officers at least twice, well, actually, I think 3 times now on those new policies, whether through e-learning or in-service training, BPD has begun to collect, has not, for the last couple of years, it's been collecting data specifically on interactions with people with suspected behavioral health disabilities. And it actually has produced its first report on that data. We this year are going to undertake our first assessment focused on interactions, BPD interactions with people with behavioral health disabilities, to see how that's going. What's the incidence of use of force? Are people being diverted away from the criminal justice system and towards the supports they need, right? Because one of the key aspects of the training that they've received is that maybe people experiencing behavioral crises don't need to be arrested, and maybe don't need to be taken to the hospital for an emergency petition either, right? Maybe what they really need is diversion to community-based resources, right? And so this is part of the training and part of what officers are having made available to them. So that's on the BPD side of the equation. On the city side of the equation, which Ken might be able to speak to more broadly, a few years ago, the city put out what we call a gap analysis, right, which identified, a number of gaps in behavioral health care in the city, because the idea, behind reducing police department interactions with people with behavioral health disabilities and people experiencing crisis is to provide them the supports they need before they even interact with police officers, right? To get them the supports they need on the front end. And the consent decree is very forward thinking, very forward looking in that regard. We have been talking about reimagining public safety for the last 5 years, especially in the wake of the murder of George Floyd. And one of the things that the consent decree has baked into it is the whole idea of reimagining public safety and diverting people with behavioral health crises, again, or keeping them away from the criminal justice system and moving them towards community-based resources. So some of the things that the city has been doing, it has last summer, I guess it was it began in the summer of 2021. They began a pilot program where 911 calls involving certain people experiencing crises were diverted from 911 to behavioral health professionals, right? One of the things that the gap analysis implementation plan, which was just produced in the fall, calls for is not only diverting those calls to behavioral health professionals, but also diverting those calls and making people aware of the Here to Help hotline, which is 988, which is the new national hotline devoted to people in crisis, so that they are getting the resources they need rather than having a police response. One of the other things that the city is working towards is building out 24/7 mobile crisis response, meaning that around the clock, even if there is somebody who is exhibiting violent tendencies, if they're also apparently in crisis, you may have a co-response, right, with a mobile crisis team that includes not just police officers, but social service professionals as well. So those are just some of the things that the city is doing alongside BPD to try to get out ahead of the issues that you've identified, Attorney Kess. There's a long way to go, but there's a lot on the drawing board right now. It remains to be seen, how well the city alongside BPD will implement some of these really cutting edge responses to calls involving people in crisis. There's a lot there. And I want to emphasize that the consent decree, doesn't require the city to completely reform and successfully reform its behavioral health system writ large in order to achieve compliance. And the parties are actually right now trying to figure out what the consent decree actually does require, how far the city has to go in terms of implementing these reforms that are on the drawing board in order to reach compliance in this area. But it's not just that they can put out a plan and say, okay, we've done enough. they have to make some strides towards implementing the recommendations in that plan in order to get to compliance. Ken, I don't know if that gets at what you wanted, but.
No, I think that's pretty good, Seth. The only thing is you've done a good job, but the only thing that I would add there, and I can't remember what the acronym stands for, but it's GBRICS, and it's really some state money, attorney, and what the gap analysis at its core was really trying to do was to try to figure out the gap between the services needed and what resources were available. And the reason why that's so important to the monitoring team and the consent decree, one of the things we have to be concerned about, again, because our focus is on, making BPD a constitutional and fair and impartial police department. One of the things we have to keep in mind, we need to make sure that when the officers who are following procedures and policies and their training are looking for resources to send someone who needs, help, and not, I don't mean the lockup. I'm talking about some kind of medical help that is available, because you can imagine if you have a good police officer who's been trained to do this, and he or she has tried 3 or 4 different occasions to send someone who needs medical help and they can't find it, that undermines morale, and that undercuts a lot of what the consent decree is trying to achieve. So there's a lot of balls in the air. I think the trend is in the right direction, but as Seth said, this is edge cutting material, and it's edge cutting. It's an edge cutting adventure, to be honest with you. And we need to see how this is playing out. But we think the parties certainly have the right intention. The question is how far can they go? And they're going to go way beyond what the consent decree requires, because the consent decree has to be careful. I mean, it's got to put in place goals that are achievable. And we know that the need is so much greater than anyone can imagine, but we have to figure out a way so that the consent decree is not around for 100 years.
Let me just add one thing. As you all probably know, we issue periodic reports on the progress BPD and the city are making toward compliance with the consent decree. Just a month ago, in late December, we put out our most recent report, which is actually called a comprehensive reassessment, which takes a comprehensive look at BPD's progress over the first 5 years of the consent decree. And I would commend that to the folks who are on this call, because that really will give you a full-blown report of where BPD is along the arc of compliance. And it talks in more detail about a lot of the things that we're talking about on this call more generally. But if you go to bpdmonitor.com and you go to the resources and reports link, it's the very first report on the list, but it's about a 100-page report, and it takes you chapter and verse through where BPD started and where it is now.
Thank you. But the second part of my question was regarding transportation and whether or not, or how do you keep individuals safe who are experiencing mental health crisis or difficult to deal with individuals. However, we can hold on to that question, just throwing it out there in the atmosphere. In the interest of time, I do want to bring it to our public safety chair, Ms. Nicole Chang.
Thanks, Ms. Guest. My first question is, how is progress being monitored in relation to BPD and the community and community engagement interactions? I know that you guys previously to the consent decree, there was the Baltimore City Collaboration Division, and that is no longer, correct?
Seth, you want to take a crack at this?
I hate to pass the buck to Jess, but I think this is more up her alley.
Sure, I can help. Thank you for that great question. We've just begun planning our assessments in that phase. So you're right, there was previously that body. The monitoring team themselves, led by Ms. Wanda and Miller Roberts, who are also on this call, has a number of individuals called neighborhood liaisons, one for every district, that stands at the ready to hear from Baltimore community members about their concerns, and a variety of different spaces, including attending neighborhood meetings, sitting at local libraries during certain sessions to be available to receive information from community members, and attending public events where we promote that we are here, we are listening, we want to serve. The NLs also serve as a conduit to the community in order to understand access to how the complaint process works. We help push them towards how they can file a complaint. We can walk alongside them, for a complaint and ensuring that they understand what their rights are and what they might be able to report out on. We are, as we enter into the assessment phase, going to be using a variety of different methods, including a very large survey mechanism to better understand how the community policing practices that we've begun to see BPD trained to are now being implemented in the field and whether the community sees that. We're also going to do a number of small focus groups from community stakeholders and leaders alike, as well as interested individuals at random who will attend those to answer key questions from our researchers in order to dig in more fully as to whether it's been infiltrated, whether there has been a change in the police department's approach to community police reactions or interactions, excuse me. Finally, we haven't yet decided how our NLs will serve in that process, but there could be a unique role for them given their standing in the community in order to serve us as we better understand how community policing has been implemented. But I will point out too that as we are doing all this, BPD continues to build out their systems and structures and practices. There have been 2 pilot sites this year undergoing neighborhood problem solving mechanisms that are actually creating micro community policing plans inside those neighborhoods to allow the community and the police directly to do problem solving through things like the SARA model, which is a standard in that space, identifying key areas of concern in the community, and then working as a city as a whole to address that, whether it's lighting, trash removal, health crisis, an inattentive landlord. So while we're doing our work on the community policing training specifically, the engagement of BPD is growing and becoming more robust. There's also a mechanism of engagement that's being built throughout the whole structure that will allow officers to refer concerning services to a lead in their district that will try to tackle some of that problem solving with city entities as well. So it's a moving target at all times as BPD continues to change its staffing protocols in order to give more time for officers to serve the community. I mean, in a dream moment, we would see that 40% of police work is engagement in a positive way with the communities they serve. Right now, though, BPD doesn't have the staffing to support that percentage. And so it would make it challenging given the calls for duty that they have at this time, or calls for service they have at this time. Chuck, I railroaded through your topic area and didn't defer to you first. Is there anything you wanted to add?
No, you actually covered everything, actually even beyond what I would have covered. So they're making good progress. I do think the last point that Jess made is one to keep in mind, and that is staffing has had an impact on their progress in this area because they are so short-staffed and heavy call volume, but they are seeking ways in which to offload some of those cars, differential response, for an example, which, you know, many departments are using. And so, you know, the training went very, very well. And, you know, they're moving forward. I think what really sets Baltimore apart from other jurisdictions, though, is the fact that we do have neighborhood liaisons and we have people like Wanda and Miller actually as part of the monitoring team working with us. And many jurisdictions, that's not the case, but it is the case here in Baltimore. And I do think it makes a difference.
So I want to, Nicole, before you go forward, I want to thank you all for, you know, that response, but I'll just tell you from where we sit, the Baltimore Police Department has a long way to go in terms of community engagement on many levels. And I think it's premature to give them accolades. I understand the staffing constraints, but even in light of a lack of staff, there could be so much more done by the police department to engage community partners to help carry the community policing load and the engagement load. I'll just tell you from our own experience, we have reached out for years to the police department under this new commissioner to get regular briefings on community engagement and community policing. And it was not until this summer, after our continued persistent efforts, that we finally began to have some meaningful ongoing conversations. And the NAACP shouldn't have had to reach out to the police department and have them have somebody consistently being in touch with us on community policing and community engagement. So, you know, as you do your assessment, and I'm not at all trying to impugn your assessment, but as you do your assessment, I hope that, and I also heard, you know, Ms. Drake say that you all are only now beginning the assessment of public perception, but I do really encourage you to press hard, press the police department hard on its community engagement efforts, and also to do the important work of assessing public perception. There was a recent shooting, police officer involved shooting. The body camera footage was released. And I know from where I sit, it didn't give me watching that video, and there's still an investigation going on to determine whether or not the officer's actions were lawful. But there is a space between compliance with practice and procedure and being lawful. To me, the video showed that there's still a great need for officer training. For starters, this particular incident, the officer gets excited and begins to respond to the call by driving down the street with no hands on the wheel, periodically spinning the steering wheel with his hand. There is no way in the world that that can be consistent with the Baltimore Police Department's procedures for operating a police vehicle. And we won't even get into the 14 bullets that were discharged from the weapon. So there is a huge confidence gap from where we sit. And I would be curious to know whether or not the general public feels like there has been significant process from the department in all of these areas that you all have mentioned. I'm not saying that the department hasn't made that progress or isn't making that progress, but in order for there to be public confidence and a real level of public safety, the public has to feel like, or not feel like, the public has to see the impact of all of these changes that are taking place. So I want to turn it back over to Nicole because I know she has another question, but I hope that you all will take into consideration what I've just shared with you.
And we
I
will.
should comment and say we will, Reverend Little, and that's really helpful. Those are the things we're looking for whenever we speak to the community. Your feedback is how we learn, where we continue to do our work. And so thank you for your feedback, and we'll take that into account. I do want to correct one thing I said where I implied we've just begun assessment. We've actually done community surveying quite regularly since the start of this process. Some has been more successful to other, given the nature of our partners' ability to do quality research work and surveying. We're continuing to grow that mechanism. This is a novel thing in the United States. Communities across the country should be asking to be able to give their input into this space, to be surveyed. No police department should shy away from some act like that, but doing the right form, getting the right questions, allowing the community to space, and then to do the analysis both of qualitative and quantitative data out of those surveys is a complex process. And in some ways we're building it while we sail the ship, which is challenging, but not so challenging we should ever shy away from it. So thank you for that feedback. We'll continue to take it seriously. And I appreciate understanding the challenges that you've had in your communication with BPD. And we always want to know more about that. Nicole, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I just wanted to.
Oh, not at all.
In response to Reverend Little's question, and I remember you had this question and this very valid concern last time we spoke, Reverend Little. But you know, Jess mentioned a community survey that we're doing in partnership with the Institute for Urban Research at Morgan State. That is underway. In fact, data collection is stopping right about now, and hopefully we'll get out a report on community perceptions about BPD, including community perceptions about how BPD interacts with community members later this spring. So that's something that's been in process for the course of the last year. In addition, we completed in the fall interviews of upwards of 100 recent detainees at Central Booking. So that was done by the Monk School, which is a public policy school up in Toronto in partnership with the Rose Street Community Center. and locally in Baltimore. And that report will come out hopefully within the next few weeks. Now that is not sort of a quote unquote sort of scientific survey taking, you know, a statistically representative sample of Baltimore's population, but it's taking a particularly affected section of Baltimore's population because it's taking over 100 people who just had interactions with the police and taking a look, you basically using the same questions that we're using in our community survey to elicit their attitudes about the police. So that is something that we take really seriously, Reverend Little, and it is an important part of our assessment process.
So Reverend Little, this has really been a great conversation. Our problem right now is we're about a half hour over and we've got 3 members who have other engagements at 7:30. So why don't we do this? I mean, this is great. We're prepared to come back, you know, anytime we can schedule it. Let's do that rather than rush through this, because I think there are some really, really good questions out there. But unfortunately, you know, we planned to end at 7. It's now 7:30. I know 3 of us have 7:30 engagements. So I'm afraid we're going to have to cut this off right now, but I hope you can reschedule us sometime soon.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, we want to thank you for your time. And I certainly want to thank Mr. Harris and Ms. Chang and Ms. Kess for their contributions to this conversation. And we are grateful to Ms. Watts for the work that she's done to bring us all together. So our thanks, and we look forward to picking up very soon. And we'll probably put some of our questions in writing and share those with you all so that we can keep the conversation going.
Thank you. Thank you. This is helpful. Very helpful.
Josh, did I leave out anything?
Hearing none, Reverend, it sounds like sermon, we can close the pulpit.
Yeah, I think we're good.
Thank you, sir. All right.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.